All right, so we're going to talk about writing equations today, and we're going to use two different formulas. We're going to use slope-intercept form, and we're going to use point-slope form. Does anybody remember slope-intercept form? Y equals, there you go, y equals mx plus b. That's what we should fill in that first blank. Okay. When we take our test on this next week, I will give you these formulas, okay, so you don't have to memorize them. What does m represent? That's what we talked all day yesterday about finding. Slope. Okay. Hold on, my pen's been not wanting to work very well today. So m is equal to slope. And then what is b? It is your y-intercept. That means where your graph crosses the y-axis. Which axis is the y-axis? Horizontal or vertical? Vertical. Vertical, okay. So when we are taking or writing these equations for slope-intercept form, we need two things. We need the slope and we need the y-intercept. And as long as we have those two pieces of information, we can just plug those in for m and b. So let's first, what I want you to do on number one is do just like we did at the very beginning of the notes yesterday. Count your slope. Count from one point to the other and figure out what your slope is. Okay. Rise over run. How many you go up and how many you go over, and we want to make sure we reduce it as much as possible. And then just make sure you're deciding whether that slope is positive or negative before you even start counting. Am I going upstairs or am I going downstairs? Upstairs. So it's going to be a positive slope. And let's start. We're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to go over 1, 2. And so what does 4 over 2 reduce to be? 2. Okay, so my slope in its most reduced form is 2. And then the other piece of information I need is my y-intercept. We talked just a minute ago about the y-axis is the vertical one. So what number or where does my graph cross the y-axis? We're looking at that number right here. -4. Okay, does everybody agree with that? Okay. And then now that I have my slope and I have my y-intercept, it's just a matter of writing the equation, plugging the slope in place of m. So y equals, but instead of m, I'm putting 2. X, and then my b is a -4, so should I write it as plus a negative or should I just write it as minus? Just minus. And that's all I'm asked to do there, is using that picture, writing my equation in slope-intercept form. So I want you to try number 2. Count your slope, decide whether it's positive or negative, figure out what your y-intercept is, and then plug both of those in to your slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. Make sure you decide whether that slope is supposed to be positive or negative. It's based off whether that line is going upstairs or downstairs. If it's upstairs, it's positive. If it's downstairs, it's negative. One, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is this a positive slope or negative slope? Negative. So did everybody get a -4/5 for their slope? Okay. And then my y-intercept, again, where does it cross the y-axis? What number is that? Okay. So tell me what my equation would be. Y equals? -4/5 x minus 2. You plug in your slope for m, you plug in your y-intercept for b, and that's all you have to do. So far, so good? Sure. Okay. All right, for both A and B in the next two examples, it's giving you the slope and the y-intercept in words, and it's asking you to write the equation. Do we do exactly the same thing? Yeah, just plug in those values. You don't have to count anything. It tells you your slope. It tells you your y-intercept, so plug each one of those in for your M and your B. Okay, for the examples right under those graphs. The first one says the slope is -3 and the y-intercept is 4. Write that equation. And then the second one says my slope is 0 and my y-intercept is -2. So we want to also write that equation. What would A look like? Y equals what? And then for B, we can do a couple of different ways. Tell me what it says. Y equals... Okay. Some people might write it as y equals 0, x minus 2, right? But what happens when you multiply something by 0? It's 0. So essentially, that would just be y equals 0 minus 2, which is really just y equals -2. Either one of those would be an okay answer for that one. I would take either one. The most simplified would just be y equals -2. But if you put that y equals 0, x minus 2, that is perfectly fine.
Would that be like a horizontal line?
Yes, it would be a horizontal line. Is everybody okay with slope-intercept? You need the two things that are in the name. You need the slope and the y-intercept. That's it. As long as you have those two pieces of information, you can write the equation. So far, so good? All right. The next one that we are going to do is we're going to use point-slope formula. Guess what you need? You need a point, an ordered pair, an x and a y, and you need a slope in order to use this. And the formula looks like this. We're going to write it down. It is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And then what I want you to do is I want you to scratch out that little asterisk thing because we're not going to do that. I couldn't get it to disappear off my notes. So just scratch that out. That little asterisk underneath that formula line, just scratch it out. I'm not going to make you solve it for y. Now, when we use point-slope form, nothing about this equation changes except for three pieces. The y1, the x1, and the m. The other x and y will always stay the variables x and y. So far, so good? Okay. Now, we are going to write an equation given the information here. It tells me that my point, my ordered pair for that first example is 4 and 1, and it tells me my slope is 2. So this ordered pair here is my x1 and y1, and that's going to go in the place of my x1 and my y1 in my formula. My slope, it tells me, is 2. That goes in place of m. So let's start. It's y minus, what is my y1 value? 1. Equals, what is my slope? 2. Parentheses, x minus, what is my x1 value? 4. And that is all you have to do. Just plug in your ordered pair and plug in your slope into that formula there. Now we could adjust it and we could put it in slope-intercept form, but I'm not going to make you do all that. I just want you to be able to write the equation. So go ahead and try number 2 over there. Same concept. You have a slope and you have a y-intercept. You have a slope and a point. So what I want you to do is write that equation using the formula y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. What would it look like? Y minus what? 4. Y minus 4 equals, what's my slope? 1/2 times x minus 2. Okay, all we did was plug in that ordered pair and the slope, and we were good. When I give you information and I ask you to write an equation, it depends on what information you're given. The two formulas have it in the name. Slope-intercept means I'm given a slope and a y-intercept. Point-slope means I'm given a point and a slope. What do both of them require? Slope-intercept and point-slope. What's in both of them? Slope-intercept and point-slope. What word did I just say twice? Slope, okay? So in order to write an equation in any form, you have to know what the slope is. Look at question number 3. Am I given the slope here? No. Can I find the slope? Yes, we did this yesterday, didn't we? We used our formula that we learned yesterday, or that we talked about yesterday. Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. So what we want to do first is just like we did yesterday, let's label our points. We're going to call them X1 and Y1 and X2 and Y2. And the first thing we need to do is figure out our slope. Now, Y2, what is Y2? What did I label that? Negative 1. Minus, what is Y1? 7. Over X2 is 1. Minus X1 is negative 3. And again, if you are not good or comfortable with adding numbers like this, you make sure you use a calculator. Negative 1 minus 7 is what? Negative 8. And 1 minus a negative 3 turns to 1 plus 3, which is 4. And what does negative 8 over 4 reduce to be? Negative 2. Now that I have my slope, I can write an equation. I have points. I have 2 points and a slope. So am I going to use slope intercept or point slope? Point slope. You can technically write 2 different equations here, but I'm going to go with what I already have labeled as X1 and Y1. So here we go. Point slope looks like this. Y minus, what is my Y1 value? 7, right? Didn't I label that? Equals, what's my slope? Negative 2. Times X minus, what's my X1 value?
1.
X1. Yeah, so, and if I do minus a negative, what does that really turn? Yeah, so it's really Y minus 7 equals negative 2 times X plus 3. What I do want to say is this. I could also write an equation using this other point and my slope, and it would look like this. You don't have to write 2, but I'm just telling you you can. Y minus the other Y equals that slope times X minus 1. So that one would look like this. You do not have to write 2, but you have options. You can use either point. I just used the one that I already had labeled as X1, Y1 so that I don't get confused. But you can technically write it either way. Anybody have any questions there? All right, I want you to try number 4. Find the slope first. Label your points X1, Y1, X2, Y2. Go ahead and find your slope, and then write your equation. When you find your slope, if it can reduce, make sure you reduce it. Use the formula that we just wrote up on the board again for you, the slope formula, Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. You do not have to memorize these formulas, you just have to know how to use them. So we should be working on finding our slope for number 4. And then once we find our slope, we can use that slope and one of our points to write an equation in point slope form. All right, I'm going to use my slope formula. I'm going to plug it in. Y2 I have labeled as -4. Minus my y1 is -7. X2 is 3. Minus my x1 is -6. And remember, anytime you minus a negative, it turns plus. What's -4 plus 7? 3. And 3 plus 6 is 9. And 3/9 reduces to be 1/3. Smaller numbers on top, which means it should stay a fraction. And then I'm going to use my first pair that I already have labeled as x1, y1. It is going to be y minus a -7 turns to what? Positive 7 equals my slope, 1/3, times x minus a negative, which also turns positive. Is everybody okay with that? So if you're given a slope and a point, you plug it in. If you're given 2 points, you need to find your slope first, and then you can plug it in. You could also have written this one like this, and again, you don't have to write it twice, but it could be y plus 4 equals 1/3 times x minus 3. That would also be an equivalent equation. And then we're going to talk about the equations of horizontal and vertical lines. The horizontal lines we can actually figure out. Vertical lines you cannot. Okay, this you just have to memorize. Okay, there's no way I can show you why this works the way it works. You just have to memorize the vertical line is always going to be x equals some number. How do you know what number it is? Is you look at where that line crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to look here at my line. Does everybody see that line on your picture? I know it's kind of hard because it's black and white. Does everybody see that line? Here's my origin where I put that red dot. What x value is that yellow line on? -1. So my equation for this is going to be x equals -1. Okay, it has an undefined slope. You cannot plug in an undefined number. So you just need to memorize that a vertical line has an equation of x equals whatever number it crosses the x-axis at. Everybody okay with that? So then the opposite of that, the horizontal line, it wouldn't be x equals, it would be y equals, and it's wherever that graph crosses the y-axis. So if we look at that, what number is this on the y-axis? So that equation is going to be 3. Now this one you technically could plug in because your slope is 0. And we could do like we did earlier. It would be 0x plus 3, which is just y equals 3. Okay. But the vertical one you cannot. You have to memorize. Vertical equations are x equals wherever that graph crosses the x-axis. Horizontal, you can technically plug in the slope because it's 0. You just can't plug in an undefined slope. But if you remember, vertical is x equals, it's the opposite of the axis. And then horizontal is y equals, wherever it crosses that graph.